His father must have had a reason for this secrecy. I accept that there was more to my father than I ever knew, and forgive me for doubting your word, but why is the need for secrecy so great? Mario paused before replying. Are you familiar with the Order of the Knights Templar? I have heard of them. They were founded many centuries ago, soon after the first of the Crusades, and became an elite fighting force of warriors for God. Effectively, they were monks in armor. They took a pledge of abstinence and a vow of poverty, but the years rolled by and their status changed. In time, they became involved in international finance, and very successful they were at it too. Other orders of knights, the Hospitallers and the Teutonic Knights, looked on them askance, and their power began to be a cause for concern, even to kings. They established a base in southern France and planned to form their own state. They paid no taxes, supported their own private army, and began to lord it over everyone. At last, nearly 200 years ago, King Philip the Fair of France moved against them. There was a terrible purge. The Templars were arrested and driven away, massacred, and at last excommunicated by the Pope. But they could not all be rooted out. They had 15,000 chapters throughout Europe. Nevertheless, with their estates and properties annexed, the Templars seemed to disappear, their power apparently broken. What happened to them? Mario shook his head. Of course, it was a ruse to ensure their own survival. They went underground, hoarding the riches they had salvaged, maintaining their organization, and bent more than ever now on their true goal. And what was that? What is that, you mean? Mario's eyes blazed. Their intention is nothing less than world domination, and only one organization is devoted to thwarting them, the Order of the Assassins, to which your father and I have the honor to belong. Ezio needed a moment to take this in. And was Alberti one of the Templars? Mario nodded solemnly. Yes, as are all the others on your father's list. And Vieri? He is one as well, and his father Francesco, and all the Pazzi clan. Ezio pondered this. That explains much, he said. There is something I haven't shown you yet. He rolled up his sleeve to reveal his secret dagger. Ah, said Mario. You were wise not to reveal that until you were sure you could trust even me completely. I was wondering what had become of it. And I see that you have had it repaired. It was your father's, given to him by our father, and to him by his. It was broken in a confrontation your father was involved in many years ago, but he could never find a craftsman skilled or trustworthy enough to restore it. You have done well, my boy. Even so, said Ezio, all this talk of assassins and Templars sounds like something from an ancient tale. It reeks of the fantastic. Mario smiled. Like something from an old parchment covered in arcane writings, perhaps? You know of the Codex page? Mario shrugged. Had you forgotten? It was with the papers you handed over to me. Can you tell me what it is? Ezio was somehow reluctant to involve his friend Leonardo in this unless it became strictly necessary. Well, whoever repaired your blade must have been able to read at least some of it, said Mario, but he raised his hand as Ezio was about to open his mouth. But I will ask you no questions. I can see that you wish to protect someone, and I will respect that. But there is more to the page than the working instructions for your weapon. The pages of the Codex are scattered now throughout Italy. It is a guide to the inner workings of the Assassin's Order, its origin, purpose, and techniques. It is, if you will, our creed. Your father believed that the Codex contained a powerful secret, something that would change the world. He paused for thought. Perhaps that is why they came for him. Ezio was overwhelmed at this information. It was a huge amount to take in all at once. Assassins, Templars, this strange Codex. I will be your guide, Ezio. But you must first learn to open your mind and always remember this. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. Mario would tell him nothing more then, though Ezio pressed him. Instead, his uncle continued to put him through the most rigorous process of military training, and from dawn to dusk he found himself exercising with the young condottieri in the practice ground, falling into bed each night too exhausted to think of anything but sleep. And then, one day, "Well done, nephew," his uncle told him. "I think you are ready." Ezio was pleased. "Thank you, uncle, for all you've given me." Mario's answer was to give the boy a bear hug. "You are family. Such is my duty and desire." "I'm glad you persuaded me to stay." Mario looked to him keenly. "So, have you reconsidered your decision to leave?" Ezio returned his gaze. "I am sorry, uncle, but my mind is made up. For the safety of Mama and Claudia, I still intend to make for the coast and take ship for Spain." Mario did not hide his displeasure. "Forgive me, nephew, but I have not taught you the skills you now have, either for my own amusement or for your exclusive benefit. I have taught you so that you may be better prepared to strike against our enemies. And if they find me, so I will." "So," Mario said bitterly, "you want to leave? To throw away everything your father fought and died for? To deny your very heritage? Well, I cannot pretend to you that I am not disappointed, highly disappointed. But so be it. Orazio will take you to the convent when you judge the moment to be right for your mother to travel, and he will see you on your way. I wish you buona fortuna." With that, Mario turned his back on his nephew and stalked away. More time passed as Ezio found he had to allow his mother enough peace and quiet to pave the way to her recovery. He himself made his preparations for leaving with a heavy heart. At last he set out to pay what he imagined might be his last visit to the convent to visit his mother and sister before taking them away, and found them better than he'd dared to hope. Claudia had made friends with some of the younger nuns, and it was clear to Ezio, to his surprise, and not greatly to his pleasure, that she was beginning to be attracted to the life. Meanwhile, his mother was making a steady but slow recovery, and the abbess, on hearing of his plans, demurred, advising him that rest was what she still badly needed, and that she should not be moved again just yet. When he returned to Mario's castle, therefore, he was full of misgivings, and he was aware that these misgivings had grown with time. At that period, some kind of military preparations had been going on in Monteriggioni, and now they seemed to be coming to a head. The sight of them distracted him. His uncle was nowhere to be seen, but he managed to track Orazio down to the map room. "What's going on?" he asked. "Where's my uncle?" "He's preparing for battle." "What? With whom?" "Oh, I expect he'd have told you if he'd thought you were staying, but we all know that that is not your intention." "Well, listen, your old friend Vieri de Pazzi has set himself up in San Gimignano. He's tripling the garrison there and has let it be known that as soon as he's ready, he's coming to raze Monteriggioni to the ground. So, we're going there first to crush the little snake and teach the Pazzi a lesson they won't forget in a hurry." Ezio took a deep breath. Surely this changed everything, and perhaps it was fate, the very stimulus he'd unconsciously been seeking. "Where is my uncle?" "In the stables." Ezio was already halfway out of the room. "Hey, where are you off to?" "To the stables. There must be a horse for me, too." Orazio smiled as he watched him go. 7. Mario, with Ezio riding at his side, led his forces to within sight of San Gimignano in the middle of a spring night in 1477. It was to be the beginning of a tough confrontation. "Tell me again what made you change your mind," said Mario, still much pleased by his nephew's change of heart. "You just like to hear it." "What if I do? Anyway, I knew it'd take Maria a good while to recover, and they are safe enough where they are, as you well know." Ezio smiled. "As I've already told you, I wanted to take responsibility. As I've already told you, Vieri troubles you because of me. And as I've told you, young man, you certainly have a healthy sense of your own importance. The truth is, Vieri troubles us because he is a Templar and we are assassins." As he spoke, Mario was scanning the tall towers, built close together, of San Gimignano. The square-built structures seemed almost to scrape the sky, and Ezio had a strange sense of having seen such a view before, but it must have been either in a dream or in another life, for he had no precise memory of the occasion. The tops of the towers were each aflame with torchlight, and there were many other torches visible on the battlements of the town walls and at its gates. "He's well garrisoned," said Mario, "and to judge by the torches, it looks as if Vieri may well be expecting us. It's a pity, but I'm not surprised. After all, he has his spies, just as I have mine." He paused. "I can see archers on the ramparts, and the gates are heavily guarded." He continued to scan the city, but even so, it looks as if he hasn't got enough men to cover every gate sufficiently. "The one on the south side looks less well defended. It must be the place he expects an attack to be least likely, so that is where we'll strike." He raised an arm and kicked his horse's flanks. His force moved forward behind him. Ezio rode beside him. "This is what we'll do," said Mario, his voice urgent. "My men and I will engage the guards at the gate, while you must find a way over the wall and get the gate opened from the inside. We must be silent and swift." He unslung a bandolier of throwing knives and handed it to Ezio. "Take these. Use them to dispatch the archers." As soon as they were close enough, they dismounted. Mario led a group of his best soldiers towards the cohort of guards posted at the southern entrance to the town. Ezio left them and hurried the last 100 yards on foot, using the cover of bushes and shrubs to conceal his progress, until he found himself at the foot of the wall. He had his hood up, and by the light of the torches at the gate he could see that the shadow cast by his hood on the wall bore a strange resemblance to an eagle's head. He looked up. The wall rose sheer above him, 50 feet or more. He couldn't see if anyone was on the battlements above. Slinging his bandolier securely, he began to climb. It was hard, as the walls were of dressed stone and gave few opportunities for footholds, but embrasures near the top allowed him to gain a firm place to lodge himself while he peered warily over the battlement's edge. Along the rampart to his left, 2 archers, their backs to him, were leaning over the wall, bows drawn. They had seen Mario's attack begin and were preparing to fire down on the assassin condottieri. Ezio did not hesitate. It was their lives or those of his friends, and now he appreciated the new skills his uncle had insisted on teaching him. Quickly, concentrating his mind and his eye in the flickering semi-darkness, he drew 2 knives and threw them, one after the other, with deadly accuracy. The first struck an archer in the nape of the neck, the blow fatal in an instant. The man slumped over the crenellations without a whisper. The next knife flew a little lower, catching the second man full in the back with such force that, with a hollow cry, he pitched forward into the blackness beneath. Below him, at the foot of a narrow stone stairway, lay the gate, but now he appreciated that Vieri's force was not enough to guard the city with absolute efficiency, for there were no soldiers posted on its interior side. He bounded down the steps 3 at a time, seeming almost to fly, and soon located the lever that operated the heavy iron bolts which locked the solid 10-foot-high oak doors. He pulled it, needing all his strength to do so, for it was not designed to yield to the force of just one man. But at last the job was done, and he hauled on one of the massive rings which were set into the doors at shoulder height. It gave, and the gate began to swing open, revealing as it did so that Mario and his men were just completing their bloody task. 2 assassin men lay dead, but 20 of Vieri's force had been sent to meet their maker. "Well done, Ezio!" Mario cried softly. So far, no alarm seemed to have been raised, but it would only be a matter of time. "Come on," said Mario. "Silently now." He turned to one of his sergeants and said, "Go back and bring the main force up." Then he led the way carefully through the silent streets. Vieri must have imposed some kind of curfew, for there was no one to be seen. Once they almost fell foul of a Pazzi patrol. Shrinking back into the shadows, they let it pass before rushing up from the rear to attack the men and bring them down with clinical efficiency. "What's next?" Ezio asked his uncle. "We need to locate the captain of the guard here. His name's Roberto. He'll know where Vieri is." Mario was showing more stress than usual. "This is taking too long. It'll be better if we split up. Look, I know Roberto. At this time of night, he'll either be drunk in his favorite taverna, or he'll be already sleeping it off in the citadel. You take the citadel. Take Orazio and a dozen good men with you." He looked at the sky, which was just beginning to lighten, and tasted the air, which already carried the coolness of a new day in it. "Meet me by the cathedral before cockcrow to report. And don't forget, I leave you in command of this gang of hooligans." He smiled affectionately at his men, took his own force, and disappeared along a street that led uphill. "The citadel's in the northwest of the town, sir," said Orazio. He grinned, as did the others. Ezio sensed both their obedience to Mario and their misgivings at having been entrusted to the command of such an untried officer. "Then let's go," Ezio replied firmly. "Follow me, at my signal." The citadel formed one side of the town's main square, not far from the cathedral, and near the top of the small hill on which the town was built. They reached it without difficulty, but before they entered it, Ezio noticed a number of Pazzi guards posted at its entrance. Motioning his men to stay back, he approached them, keeping to the shadows and silent as a fox, until he was close enough to overhear the conversation which was going on between 2 of them. It was clear that they were unhappy with Vieri's leadership, and the more vehement of the 2 was in full flow. "I tell you, Tebaldo," the former was saying, "I'm not happy with that young puppy Vieri. I don't think he could aim his piss into a bucket, let alone defend a town against a determined force. As for Capitano Roberto, he drinks so much he's like a bottle of Chianti dressed in a uniform." "You talk too much, Zohan," cautioned Tebaldo. "Remember what happened to Bernardo when he dared to open his mouth." The other checked himself and nodded soberly. "You are right. I heard Vieri had him blinded." "Well, I'd like to keep my eyesight, thank you very much, so we should end this talk. We don't know how many of our comrades feel like us, and Vieri has spies everywhere." Satisfied, Ezio made his way back to his own troop. An unhappy garrison is rarely an efficient one. But there was no guarantee that Vieri did not command a strong, loyal corps of Pazzi adherents. As for the rest of Vieri's men, Ezio had learned for himself how strong a commander fear itself can be. But the task now was to gain access to the citadel. Ezio scanned the square. Apart from the small force of Pazzi guards, it was dark and empty. "Orazio." "Yes, sir." "Will you engage these men and finish them off, quickly and silently? I'm going to try to get up on the roof and see whether they've got any more people posted in the courtyard." "It's what we came here to do, sir." Leaving Orazio and his soldiers to take on the guards, Ezio, checking that he still had sufficient throwing knives in his bandolier, ran a little way into a side street adjacent to the citadel, climbed to a nearby roof, and from it leapt to the roof of the citadel, which was built round in its own interior courtyard. He thanked God that Vieri had evidently neglected to post men in the high towers of the houses of the dominant local families which punctuated the town, since from that vantage point they could have surveyed everything that was going on. But he also knew that gaining control of those towers would be the first objective of Mario's main force. From the roof of the citadel, he could see that the courtyard was deserted, leapt down to the top of its colonnade, and from there dropped to the ground. It was an easy maneuver to open the gates and to position his men, who had dragged the bodies of the defeated Pazzi patrol out of sight in the shadows of the colonnade. To avoid suspicion, they had reclosed the citadel gates behind them. The citadel seemed, to all intents and purposes, deserted. But soon afterwards there came the sound of voices from the square beyond, and another group of Vieri's men appeared, opening the gates and entering the courtyard, supporting, among them, a thick-set man running to fat, who was clearly drunk. "Where have the gate guards buggered off to?" the man wanted to know. "Don't say Vieri's countermanded me and sent them off on another one of his bloody patrols." Ser Roberto, one of the men, supported his pleading. "Isn't it time for you to get some rest?" "What do you mean? Made it back here just fine, didn't I? Anyway, night's still young." The new arrivals managed to seat their chief on the edge of the fountain in the middle of the courtyard and gathered round, uncertain what to do next. "Anyone would think I'm not a good captain," said Roberto self-pityingly. "Nonsense, sir," said the man closest to him. "Vieri thinks I'm not," said Roberto. "You should hear the way he talks to me." He paused, looking round and trying to focus before continuing in a maudlin tone. "It's only a matter of time before I'm replaced. Or worse." He stopped again, snuffling. "Where's that bloody bottle? Give it here." He drank a deep draught, looking at the bottle to assure himself that it was empty, and flung it away. "It's Mario's fault. I couldn't believe it when our spies reported that he'd taken his nephew in, rescued the little bugger from Vieri himself. Now Vieri can scarcely think straight for rage, and I have to face my old compagno." He looked around blearily. "Dear old Mario. We were brothers in arms once, did you know that? But he refused to come over to the Pazzi with me, even though it was better money, better quarters, better equipment, the lot. I wish he were here now. For 2 pins, I'd—" "Excuse me," Ezio interrupted, stepping forward. "What?" said Roberto. "Who are you?" "Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Mario's nephew." "What?" Roberto roared, struggling to his feet and grabbing unsuccessfully for his sword. "Arrest the little tyke!" He leant close so that Ezio could smell the sour wine on his breath. Onions, too. "You know what, Ezio?" he smiled. "I should be grateful to you. Now that I've got you, there's nothing Vieri wouldn't give me. Maybe I'll retire. A nice little villa on the coast, perhaps." "Don't count your chickens, Capitano," said Ezio. Roberto spun round to see what his men had already discovered, that they were surrounded by assassin mercenaries, all armed to the teeth. "Ah!" said Roberto, sinking down again. All the fight seemed to have gone out of him. Once the Pazzi guards had been manacled and taken to the citadel's dungeon, Roberto, provided with a fresh bottle, sat with Ezio at a table in a room off the courtyard and talked. At last Roberto was convinced. "You want Vieri? I'll tell you where he is. It's all up with me anyway. Go to the Palazzo of the Dolphin in the square near the northern gate. There's a meeting being held there." "Who is he meeting? Do you know?" Roberto shrugged. "More of his people from Florence, I think. Supposed to be bringing reinforcements with them." They were interrupted by Orazio, looking worried. Ezio, quickly! There's a battle going on over by the cathedral. We'd better get going. All right, let's go. What about him? Ezio looked at Roberto. Leave him. I think he may have chosen the right side at last. As soon as he was out in the square, Ezio could hear the noise of fighting coming from the open space in front of the cathedral. Drawing nearer, he saw that his uncle's men, their backs to him, were being forced to retreat by a large brigade of Pazzi troops. Using his throwing knives to clear a path, he fought his way to his uncle's side and told him what he'd learned. "Good for Roberto," said Mario, barely missing a beat, as he cut and sliced at his attackers. "I always regretted his going over to the Pazzi, but he's turned up trumps at last. Go, find out what Vieri's up to." "But what about you? Will you be able to hold them off?" Mario looked grim. "For a while at least, but our main force should have secured most of the towers by now, and then they'll be here to join us. So make haste, Ezio. Don't let Vieri escape." The palazzo lay in the extreme north of the city, far from the fighting, though the Pazzi guards here were numerous, probably the reinforcements of whom Roberto had spoken, and Ezio had to pick his way carefully to avoid them. He arrived just in time. The meeting appeared to be over, and he could see a group of 4 robed men making their way to a group of tethered horses. Ezio recognized Jacopo de Pazzi, his nephew, Francesco, Vieri himself, and he let out a gasp of surprise, the tall Spaniard who had been present at his father's execution. To his further surprise, Ezio noticed the arms of a cardinal embroidered on the shoulder of the man's cloak. The men drew to a halt by the horses, and Ezio managed to reach the cover of a nearby tree to see if he could catch anything of their conversation. He had to strain, and the words came in snatches, but he overheard enough to intrigue him. "Then it's settled," the Spaniard was saying. "Vieri, you will remain here and re-establish our position as soon as possible. Francesco will organize our forces in Florence for the moment when the right time comes to strike, and you, Jacopo, must be prepared to calm the populace once we have seized control. Do not hurry things. The better planned our action is, the greater the likelihood of success." "But Ser Rodrigo," put in Vieri, "what am I to do with that ubriacone Mario?" "Get rid of him. There is no way that he must learn of our intentions." The man they called Rodrigo swung himself up into the saddle. Ezio saw his face clearly for a moment, the cold eyes, the aquiline nose, and guessed him to be in his mid-40s. "He's always been trouble," snarled Francesco, "just like that bastardo of a brother of his." "Don't worry, Padre," said Vieri. "I will soon reunite them, in death." "Come," said the man they called Rodrigo. "We have stayed too long." Jacopo and Francesco mounted their steeds beside him, and they turned towards the northern gate, which the Pazzi guards were already opening. "May the Father of Understanding guide us all." They rode out, and the gates closed again behind them. Ezio was wondering whether now would be a good opportunity to try to cut Vieri down, but he was too well guarded, and besides, it might be better to take him alive and question him. But he carefully made a mental note of the names of the men he had overheard, intending to add them to his father's list of enemies, for clearly a conspiracy was afoot in which they were all involved. As it was, he was interrupted by the arrival of a further squad of Pazzi guards, the leader of which approached Vieri at a run. "What is it?" snapped Vieri. "Commandante, I bring bad news. Mario Auditore's men have broken through our last defenses." Vieri sneered. "That's what he thinks, but see?" He waved at the strong force of men around him. "More men have arrived from Florence. We will sweep him out of San Gimignano before the day is done, like the vermin he is." He raised his voice to the assembled soldiers. "Hurry to meet the enemy," he cried. "Crush them like the scum they are." Raising a harsh battle cry, the Pazzi militia formed up under their officers and moved away from the north gate southwards through the city to encounter Mario's condottieri. Ezio prayed that his uncle would not be taken unawares, for now he would be severely outnumbered. But Vieri had remained behind, and alone now, except for his personal bodyguard, was making his way back into the safety of the palazzo. No doubt he still had some business pertaining to the meeting to conclude there, or perhaps he was returning to strap on his armor for the fray. Either way, soon the sun would be up. It was now or never. Ezio stepped out of the darkness, pulling back the cowl from over his head. "Good morning, Messer de Pazzi," he said. "Had a busy night?" Vieri rounded on him, a combination of shock and terror flickering across his face for an instant. He regained his composure and blustered, "I might have known you'd turn up again. Make your peace with God, Ezio. I've more important things than you to deal with now. You're just a pawn to be swept off the board." His guards rushed Ezio, but he was ready for them. He brought down the first of them with his last throwing knife, the small blade scything through the air with a devilish singing sound. Then he drew his sword and battle dagger and closed with the rest of the guards. He cut and thrust like a madman in a swirl of blood, his movement economical and lethal, until the last, badly wounded, limped away to safety. But now Vieri was on him, wielding a cruel-looking battle-axe he'd seized from the saddle of his horse, which still stood where the others had been tethered. Ezio swerved to avoid his deadly aim, but the blow, though it glanced off his body armor, still sent him reeling, and he fell, letting his sword drop. In a moment, Vieri stood over him, kicking the sword out of reach, the axe raised above his head. Summoning his remaining strength, Ezio aimed a kick at his opponent's groin, but Vieri saw it coming and jumped back. As Ezio took the chance to regain his feet, Vieri threw his axe at his left wrist, knocking the battle dagger out of it and cutting a deep wound in the back of his left hand. Vieri drew his own sword and dagger. "If you want a job doing well, do it yourself," Vieri said. "Sometimes I wonder what I pay these so-called bodyguards for. Goodbye, Ezio," and he closed on his enemy. The heat of pain had seared through the young man's body as the axe had slashed his hand, making his head swim and his vision white out. But now he remembered all that he had been taught, instinct taking over. He shook himself, and in the moment when Vieri poised himself to deliver the fatal blow on his supposedly unarmed opponent, Ezio flexed his right hand, spreading his fingers up and open. Instantaneously, the mechanism of his father's concealed dagger clicked, the blade shooting out from under his fingers, extending to its full and lethal length, the dull metal belying the vicious edge. Vieri's arm was raised, his flank was open. Ezio plunged the dagger into his side, the blade slipping in without the least resistance. Vieri stood for a moment transfixed, then, dropping his weapons, fell to his knees. Blood flowed like a waterfall from between his ribs. Ezio caught him as he sank to the ground. "You don't have much time, Vieri," he said urgently. "Now is your chance to make your peace with God. Tell me what you were discussing. What are your plans?" Vieri answered him with a slow smile. "You will never defeat us," he said. "You will never conquer the Pazzi, and you will certainly never conquer Rodrigo Borgia." Ezio knew he had only moments before he'd be talking to a corpse. He persisted with even greater urgency. "Tell me, Vieri, had my father discovered your plans? Is that why your people had him killed?" But Vieri's face was ashen. He grasped Ezio's arm tightly. A trickle of blood spilled from the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were beginning to glaze. Still, he managed an ironic smile. "Ezio, what are you hoping for? A full confession? I'm sorry, but I just don't have the time." He gasped for breath, and more blood flowed from his mouth. "A pity, really. In another world, we might even have been friends." Ezio felt the grip on his arm relax. But then the pain of his wound welled up again, together with the stark memory of the death of his kinsman, and he was riven with a cold fury. "Friends?" he said to the corpse. "Friends, you piece of shit! Your body should be left on the side of a road to rot like a dead crow. Nobody will miss you. I only wish you'd suffered more. Ezio, said a strong, gentle voice behind him. Enough. Show the man some respect. Ezio stood and whirled round to confront his uncle. Respect? After all that happened? Do you think if he'd won, he wouldn't have hanged us from the nearest tree? Mario was battered, covered with dust and blood, but he stood firm. But he didn't win, Ezio, and you are not like him. Do not become a man like he was. He knelt by the body, and with a gloved hand reached down and closed its eyes. May death provide the peace your poor, angry soul sought, he said. Requiescat in pace. Ezio watched in silence. When his uncle stood up, he said, Is it over? No, replied Mario. There is still fierce fighting, but the tide is turning in our favor. Roberto has brought some of his men over to our side, and it is only a matter of time. He paused. You will, I am sure, be grieved to know that Orazio is dead. Orazio? He told me what a brave man you were before he died. Live up to that praise, Ezio. I will try. Ezio bit his lip. Though he did not acknowledge it consciously, this was another lesson learned. I must rejoin my men, but I have something for you, something that will teach you a little more about your enemy. It's a letter we took from one of the priests here. It was intended for Vieri's father, but Francesco evidently is no longer here to receive it. He handed over a paper, the seal broken open. The same priest will oversee the funeral rites. I'll get one of my sergeants to make the arrangements. I have things to tell you. Mario raised his hand. Later, when our business here is finished. After this setback, our enemies won't be able to move as fast as they'd hoped, and Lorenzo in Florence will be very much on his guard. For the moment, we have the advantage of them. He stopped. But I must get back. Read the letter, Ezio, and reflect on what it says. And see to your hand. He was gone. Ezio moved away from Vieri's body and sat beneath the tree he had hidden behind earlier. Flies were already hovering round Vieri's face. Ezio opened and read the letter. Messer Francesco, I have done as you requested and spoken with your son. I agree with your assessment, though only in part. Yes, Vieri is brash and prone to act without forethought. And he has a habit of treating his men like playthings, like chess pieces for whose lives he shows no more concern than if they were made of ivory or wood. And his punishments are indeed cruel. I have received reports of at least 3 men being disfigured as a result. But I do not think him, as you put it, beyond repair. Rather, I believe the solution to be a simple matter. He seeks your approval, your attention. These outbursts of his are a result of insecurities born of a sense of inadequacy. He speaks of you fondly and often, and expresses a desire to be closer to you. So if he is loud and foul and angry, I believe it is simply because he wants to be noticed. He wants to be loved. Act as you see fit on the information I've given you here, but now I must ask that we end this correspondence. Were he to discover the nature of our discourse, I candidly fear what might become of me. Yours in confidence, Father Giacondo. Ezio sat for a long while after having read the letter, thinking. He looked at Vieri's body. There was a wallet at his belt he had not noticed before. He walked over and took it, returning to his tree to examine its contents. There was a miniature picture of a woman, some florins in a pouch, a little notebook that had not been used, and carefully rolled a piece of vellum. With trembling hands, Ezio opened it and immediately recognized what it was, a page of the Codex. The sun rose higher, and a group of monks appeared with a wooden stretcher on which they laid Vieri's body and carried it away. As spring turned to summer again, and the mimosa and azaleas had given way to lilies and roses, an uneasy peace returned to Tuscany. Ezio was content to see that his mother continued in her recovery, though her nerves had been so shattered by the tragedy that had struck her that now it seemed to him she might never leave the peaceful calm of the convent. Claudia was considering taking the first vows that would lead to her novitiate, a prospect that pleased him less, but he knew that she had been born with as stubborn a streak as his own, and that to try to thwart her would merely strengthen her resolve. Mario had spent the time ensuring that San Gimignano, now under the sober and reformed control of his old comrade, Roberto, and its territory, no longer posed a threat, and that the last pockets of Pazzi resistance had been weeded out. Monteriggioni was safe, and after the victory celebrations had been concluded, Mario's condottieri were allowed a well-earned furlough, using it according to their tastes by spending time with their families or drinking or whoring, but never neglecting their training. And their squires kept their weapons sharp and their armor free from rust, as the masons and carpenters ensured that the fortifications of both town and castle were well maintained. To the north, the external threat that might have been posed by France was in abeyance, since King Louis was busy getting rid of the last of the English invaders and facing up to the problems the Duke of Burgundy was causing him. While to the south, Pope Sixtus IV, a potential ally of the Pazzi, was too busy promoting his relatives and supervising the construction of a magnificent new chapel in the Vatican to give much thought to interference in Tuscany. Mario and Ezio had had many and long conversations, however, regarding the threat that they knew had not disappeared. "I must tell you more of Rodrigo Borgia," Mario told his nephew. "He was born in Valencia, but studied law in Bologna and has never returned to Spain, since he is better placed to pursue his ambitions here. At the moment, he is a prominent member of the Curia in Rome, but his sights are always set higher. He is one of the most powerful men in all Europe, but he is more than a cunning politician within the church." He lowered his voice. "Rodrigo is the leader of the Order of the Templars." Ezio felt his heart turn over in his body. "That explains his presence at the murder of my poor father and my brothers. He was behind it." "Yes, and he won't have forgotten you, especially as it was largely thanks to you that he lost his power base in Tuscany. And he knows the stock you come from and the danger you continue to pose him. Be fully aware, Ezio, that he will have you killed as soon as he gets the chance." "Then I must stand against him if I wish ever to be free." "He must remain in our sights, but we have other business nearer home first, and we have stayed our hand long enough. Come to my study." They made their way from the garden, where they had been walking, into an inner room of the castle, at the end of a corridor that led from the map room. It was a quiet place, dark without being gloomy, book-lined, and more like the room of an academico than a military commander. Its shelves also contained artifacts that looked as if they might have come from Turkey or Syria, and volumes that Ezio could see from the writing on their spines were written in Arabic. He had asked his uncle about them, but received only the vaguest of replies. Once there, Mario unlocked a chest, and from it drew a leather document wallet, from which he took a sheaf of papers. Among them were some Ezio recognized immediately. "Here is your father's list, my boy, though I should not call you that any more, for you are a man now, and a full-blooded warrior. And to it, I have added the names you told me of in San Gimignano." He looked at his nephew and handed him the document. "It is time for you to begin your work." "Every Templar on it shall fall to my blade," said Ezio evenly. His eyes lit on the name of Francesco di Pazzi. "Here, with him, I will start. He is the worst of the clan, and fanatical in his hatred of our allies, the Medici." "You are right to say so," Mario added. "So, you will make your preparations for Florence?" "That is my resolve." Good, but there is more you must learn if you are to be fully equipped. Come. Mario turned to a bookcase and touched a hidden button set into its side. On silent hinges it swung out and opened to reveal a stone wall beyond, on which a number of square slots had been marked out. 5 were filled, the rest were empty. Ezio's eyes gleamed as he saw it. The 5 filled spaces were occupied with pages of the Codex. "I see you recognize what this is," said Mario, "and I am not surprised. After all, there is the page your father left you, which your clever friend in Florence managed to decode, and these which Giovanni managed to find and translate before he died." "And the one I took from Vieri's body," added Ezio, "but its contents are still a mystery." "Alas, you are right. I am not the scholar your father was, though with every page that is added, and with the help of the books in my study, I am getting closer to unraveling the mystery. Look, do you see the way the words come from one page to the next, and how the symbols join?"
It's you. I knew this day would come. Please, show mercy.